Millionaire invites his ex-wife to his wedding to humiliate her in front of everyone. But when she shows up with a boy who looks exactly like him, he freezes. The morning sun filtered through the massive windows of the top-floor office, bathing the room in a golden light that contrasted with the grim expression on James Carter's face. At 45, the businessman exuded an aura of success and arrogance, his cold blue eyes surveying the city below as though it were his own private kingdom. With nimble fingers, James straightened his silk tie, a nervous habit that betrayed his outward composure. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, perfectly groomed grey hair, an impeccable Italian suit, the picture of wealth and power. But there was more in his eyes, a mix of triumph and malice that would make any keen observer shiver. "Mr. Carter," his assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts. "The wedding invitations have arrived." James turned, a thin smile forming on his lips. "Excellent, Amy. Bring them here." Moments later, he was holding what looked like a work of art in paper and gold. The invitations were luxurious, befitting the event they announced. The wedding of the year between James Carter and Isabel Collins, the beauty 20 years his junior, who would soon become his wife. His eyes scanned the guest list, stopping at one particular name, Marie Jones. His smile widened, a mixture of satisfaction and something darker. "Amy," he called out, his voice laced with false casualness, "make sure this invitation is delivered personally. I want to be sure it gets into the right hands." The assistant nodded, taking the golden envelope bearing Marie's name. If she noticed anything odd about her boss's request, she didn't show it. Alone again, James allowed himself a moment of almost childish anticipation. He imagined Marie's expression when she received the invitation, shock, maybe even a flash of pain. It was more than he could have hoped for. His eyes drifted to a specific drawer in his desk. With an almost unconscious movement, he opened it, revealing an old photo. In it, a younger version of himself smiled beside a woman with brown hair and kind eyes, Marie. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the apartment, followed by a deafening silence. James, 5 years younger, stared at Marie with a mix of shock and anger. At their feet, shards of what had been an expensive vase were scattered across the marble floor. "How could you?" Marie's voice trembled, her eyes, usually so warm, now filled with hurt and disappointment. James opened his mouth to respond, to explain, to deny, but the words wouldn't come. The phone in his hand, incriminating messages still on the screen, felt like a ton of bricks. "I can't," he began, but Marie raised her hand, silencing him. "No, I don't want to hear your excuses, James. It's over." With quick, determined movements, she began collecting her things. James watched, paralyzed, as the love of his life packed her world into a suitcase. "Marie, please, let's talk. I can explain." But she was already at the door, suitcase in hand. Her eyes met his one last time, a mix of pain and resolve. "Goodbye, James." The door closed with a soft click, a sound that echoed in James's mind like a gunshot. Back in the present, James slammed the drawer shut, driving out the memories. His eyes, now as hard as stone, returned to the view of the city beyond. The past was the past. Now he had Isabel, he had success, he had everything he'd ever wanted, and soon he'd have his revenge. With a decisive gesture, he picked up the phone. "Thomas, yes, the invitations have arrived. Everything is going according to plan." On the other end, his best friend and best man chuckled. "I can't wait to see the look on her face, James." "It'll be priceless," James agreed, a cold smile forming. "Yes, my friend. It'll be a day to remember." Hanging up, he allowed himself another moment of contemplation. Outside, the city continued its frenetic routine, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the penthouse office. James Carter had a plan, and nothing and no one would stop him from carrying it out. The golden invitation for Marie glimmered under the sunlight, a ticking time bomb disguised as courtesy. The stage was set, the players in position. Only the grand finale was missing, and James could hardly wait to see it play out. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the hospital corridor, familiar and comforting to Marie Jones. Her footsteps echoed softly as she did her night rounds, checking on patients with a gentle smile and reassuring words. At 40, Marie carried an aura of calm and compassion that made her one of the ward's most beloved nurses. At the end of her shift, exhausted but satisfied, Marie headed to the locker room. As she changed out of her scrubs into street clothes, her thoughts drifted to Lucas, her 5-year-old son, who was waiting for her at home with the babysitter. An involuntary smile curved her lips as she pictured his angelic little face. "Marie?" Her colleague, Sophia, jolted her back to reality. "There's a package for you at reception. It looks fancy." Intrigued, Marie finished getting dressed and headed to reception. The golden envelope on the counter looked out of place in the clinical setting. Her heart pounded at the sight of the elegant handwriting on the address, James. With trembling hands, Marie picked up the envelope. It was heavy, the paper expensive to the touch. She hesitated for a moment before opening it, fearing what she might find inside. The wedding invitation was a masterpiece of design and extravagance. The words danced before her eyes. "James Carter and Isabel Collins request the pleasure of your company in celebrating their union." Marie felt as though the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Memories flooded her mind, happy moments with James, followed by the searing pain of betrayal. 5 years had passed, but the wound, seemingly healed, felt raw again. "Are you okay, Marie?" Sophia asked, noticing her sudden pallor. Marie forced a smile. "Yes, just unexpected news." The drive home that night felt longer than usual. The invitation weighed in her bag as if it were made of lead. Marie wrestled with a storm of emotions: anger, hurt, confusion, and surprisingly, a stab of curiosity. Why would James invite her? After 5 years of silence, what was his game? Entering her modest apartment, Marie was greeted by an explosion of energy in the form of Lucas. The boy ran into her arms, his infectious laughter momentarily dispelling the dark clouds in her thoughts. "Mommy, look what I drew today." Marie knelt down, hugging her son and examining the colorful picture he proudly held up. Her heart constricted as she noticed, not for the first time, how much Lucas was the spitting image of James. Those same piercing blue eyes, the same charming smile. After tucking Lucas into bed, Marie allowed herself to sit in the living room, the open invitation on her lap. Her fingers traced the golden lettering, her mind a whirlpool of conflicting thoughts. Going to the wedding would be madness. James had probably invited her out of pure spite, to rub his new happiness in her face, or worse, to humiliate her somehow. The James she'd known in their final moments was capable of that and more. But then why did she feel this almost irresistible urge to attend? Her gaze drifted to a photo of Lucas on the shelf. The boy smiled, innocent and unaware of the storm his very existence represented. James didn't know about him. In the weeks after she left, Marie discovered she was pregnant. The betrayal still fresh, she decided not to tell James, convinced he didn't deserve to be part of her son's life. Now, 5 years later, she wondered if she'd made the right choice. With a heavy sigh, Marie picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over James's number, saved so long ago but never used. Should she call, reveal the truth, demand explanations about the invitation? No. An idea began to form in her mind. It was risky, potentially cruel, but justified. Marie wasn't sure. She only knew she needed to face her past, for her own sake and for Lucas's. Resolute, she typed a short message. "Thank you for the invitation. I will be there." She sent it before she could change her mind, her heart pounding in her chest. In the days that followed, Marie oscillated between determination and doubt. She prepared meticulously, choosing a dress that was elegant yet understated, mentally rehearsing what she might say. More importantly, she prepared Lucas, explaining that they'd be attending a special party where he might meet an old friend of Mommy's. On the eve of the wedding, Marie stood before the mirror, examining her reflection with a critical eye. Time had been kind to her, but the fine lines around her eyes told stories of both laughter and tears, of sleepless nights and days of pure joy with Lucas. "Mommy," Lucas's sleepy voice called. "What party are we going to again?" Marie turned, her heart swelling with love as she saw her son rubbing his tired eyes. She knelt down, straightening his tiny bow tie. "It's a very important party, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about. You're going to meet some new people." Lucas nodded, his eyes so much like James's, shining with excitement. "And I have to be a gentleman, right?" Marie chuckled softly, kissing her son's forehead. "Exactly. You're my little prince." That night, lying in bed, Marie stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Tomorrow, she would face James again. Tomorrow, the world she had carefully built over the last 5 years might crumble. But as she listened to Lucas's gentle breathing in the next room, Marie felt a surge of courage wash over her. It didn't matter what James had planned. She was prepared. She had her own ace up her sleeve, her own surprise. With that thought, Marie finally drifted off, dreaming of blue eyes, her son's, not those of the man she had once loved and feared in equal measure. The stage was set, the confrontation inevitable. And Marie Jones was ready to face the coming storm, with Lucas firmly by her side. The sun had barely risen when James Carter was already awake, his keen gaze examining every detail of the grand ballroom at the most luxurious hotel in the city. Exotic flowers adorned every surface, their fragrances mingling in the air. Crystals glittered in the soft light, promising a dazzling spectacle once night fell. "Move it more to the left," James ordered the decorators, who hurriedly adjusted an enormous floral arrangement. His voice, though calm, carried an underlying tension that made the staff move with extra caution. A tall, well-dressed man entered the ballroom, his confident stride echoing in the vast space. Thomas Brooks, James's best friend and best man, smiled upon seeing the groom micromanaging every detail. "James Yell, my friend," Thomas called, patting the groom on the back. "Don't you trust the professionals you hired?" James turned, a tense smile on his lips. "Thomas, finally, I need your opinion on the dinner menu." Thomas laughed, shaking his head. "The menu we already approved 3 times. Come on, James, you need to relax. It's your big day after all." The two men moved to a more private corner of the ballroom. James cast a glance around, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. "Speaking of which," James lowered his voice, "is everything ready for our special surprise?" Thomas's smile took on a mischievous edge. "Ah, yes, the little show we planned for your ex? Everything's in place. It's going to be quite a spectacle." James nodded, a mix of anticipation and something darker flashing in his eyes. "Excellent. Marie won't know what hit her. After today, she'll never again dare think she can be better off than me." Thomas studied his friend for a moment, a shadow of concern crossing his face. "James, are you sure about this? It's been 5 years. Maybe it's time to let the past go." "Let it go," James hissed, his composure wavering for an instant. "She humiliated me, Thomas. She walked out like I meant nothing. It's time she got a taste of her own medicine." Thomas raised his hands in a placating gesture. All right. Just checking. You know I've got your back no matter what." James took a deep breath, regaining his composure. "I know, and I appreciate it. Now, let's review the details one more time." As the two men whispered conspiratorially on the other side of the city, Marie Jones was fighting her own battle. Marie's bedroom looked like it had been hit by a storm of fabric and accessories. Dresses were strewn across the bed. Shoes formed a maze on the floor. In the middle of it all, Marie stood in front of the mirror, her reflection a blend of determination and doubt. "The navy blue one," came the decisive voice of Sophia, who was perched on the edge of the bed. A colleague and close friend, she had insisted on helping Marie get ready for the big day. Marie picked up the suggested dress, an elegant design that subtly hugged her curves. "Isn't it too flashy?" Sophia rolled her eyes, a playful smile on her lips. "Marie, my dear, you're going to the wedding of your millionaire ex-husband. Flashy is the least you can be." With a sigh, Marie slipped into the dress. The soft fabric caressed her skin, and when she looked in the mirror again, she couldn't help but notice how the deep blue brought out her eyes. "Perfect," Sophia declared. "James won't know what hit him." At the mention of James's name, Marie felt her stomach clench. "Sophia, what if this is a terrible mistake? What if nothing?" Sophia interrupted, standing up to straighten Marie's dress. "You have every right to be there. Besides," she added with a conspiratorial smile, "you have your own ace up your sleeve, don't you?" As if summoned by Sophia's words, the sound of childish laughter echoed through the apartment. Lucas burst into the room, his little suit slightly askew, bow tie hanging loose around his neck. "Mommy, look, I got dressed all by myself." Marie crouched down, leveling with her son, a genuine smile lighting her face for the first time that day. "Almost perfect, my love. Let me help you with that tie." While Marie adjusted her son's outfit, she once again couldn't help noticing the striking resemblance to James. The same piercing blue eyes, the same charming smile. It was like looking at a photo of James as a child. "You look beautiful, Mommy," Lucas said, his eyes shining with admiration. Marie felt her heart tighten. For a moment, every doubt and fear about what she was about to do flooded her mind. Was she really ready to drop this bombshell on James's life, to change Lucas's life forever? But then she remembered the pain, the betrayal, the years of struggle raising Lucas alone. Her resolve hardened. "Thank you, my prince," she replied, kissing her son's forehead. "Now how about we finish getting ready? We have an important party to attend." Sophia observed the scene with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Marie," she called softly once Lucas left the room. "Are you sure about this? Bringing Lucas, it's a big step." Marie straightened up, meeting her friend's gaze with determination. "It's the right step, Sophia. James needs to know. Lucas deserves to meet his father, even if things don't go as planned." Sophia nodded, pulling her friend into a hug. "I'll have my phone on me. Call if you need anything." The next few hours flew by in a blur of final preparations. Marie styled her hair into an elegant updo, applied subtle yet impactful makeup. Every detail was armor, preparing her for the battle ahead. When they were finally ready, Marie and Lucas stood before the mirror in the living room. Mother and son, an image of elegance and innocence. Marie felt a wave of love and protection as she looked at Lucas, so unaware of the drama about to unfold. "Ready for our big adventure?" she asked, offering her son her hand. Lucas smiled, that smile so reminiscent of James it nearly hurt. "Ready, Mommy." With one last glance at her reflection, Marie grabbed her purse and car keys. The golden invitation, slightly crumpled from being handled so much, sat safely inside her bag. It was time. As they left the apartment, Marie couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to cross a point of no return. For better or for worse, after tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. On the horizon, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, an appropriate prelude to a night that promised to be unforgettable for everyone involved. James Carter's office, normally a sanctuary of calm and control, was in a state of contained chaos. Papers scattered across the mahogany desk, computer screens blinking with downward trending charts, and the incessant ring of the phone created a palpable sense of urgency. "Mr. Carter," his financial assistant's tense voice blared through the speakerphone, "the last quarter's numbers are concerning. Company stock has dropped 15% just this week." James, his eyes fixed on the panoramic view of the city through the penthouse window, pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a migraine coming on. "Bernard, tomorrow is my wedding day. Can't this wait until Monday? Sir, with all due respect, it can't wait. There are market rumors about— Enough, James snapped, his voice sharp. Take care of it. Do whatever it takes to stabilize the situation. Use our reserves if you must. Just handle it quietly. Hanging up before waiting for a response, James poured himself a generous glass of whiskey, his hands trembling slightly. The amber liquid burned down his throat, a welcome sensation that helped steady his nerves. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his dark thoughts. Thomas entered, his usual smile replaced by a worried expression. "Problems?" he asked, nodding at the mess on the desk. James forced a smile. "Nothing that can't wait. Tomorrow is the big day, after all." Thomas nodded, but his eyes remained serious. "James, maybe we should reconsider." "Don't even think about it," James interrupted. "Everything is set. Marie will get exactly what she deserves." A tense silence settled between the two friends. Thomas looked as though he wanted to say more, but held back. Instead, he pulled out his phone. "I need to make a few calls." "Last-minute details for tomorrow," he said, quickly leaving the office. In the hallway, away from James's ears, Thomas dialed a number not saved in his contacts. "Hello? Yes, it's me. Listen, we need to speed things up. Yes, I know it's risky, but we have no choice. Tomorrow night, without fail." Hanging up, Thomas took a deep breath, a mix of guilt and resolve in his eyes. Whatever he was planning, it was clearly far more serious than just a surprise for Marie. Across the city, in her modest apartment, Marie Jones sat on Lucas's bed, watching her son sleep peacefully. Her fingers absently played with the now crumpled wedding invitation. "How am I going to do this?" she whispered to herself, the reality of her plan finally weighing on her. Standing up quietly, Marie went to the living room, where she had set up a small scenario to practice. A chair represented James, and she positioned herself in front of it. Lucas imagined at her side. "James," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something you need to know." Marie shook her head, dissatisfied, too hesitant. She tried again. "James, this is Lucas, your son." Too direct. Marie groaned in frustration. How do you introduce a 5-year-old child to a father who never knew he existed? And on his wedding day, no less. For hours, she rehearsed different approaches, each seeming inadequate or insufficient. As the night wore on, Marie's resolve fluctuated between fierce certainty and paralyzing doubt. Finally, exhausted, she flopped onto the sofa. Her eyes fell on a photo of Lucas on the side table. The boy's radiant smile, so much like James's, reminded her why she was doing this. "For you, my love," Marie whispered, gently touching the photo. "So you can know your father, so you have the chance you deserve." With renewed resolve, Marie finally allowed herself to rest, knowing that the next day would be one of the most challenging of her life. In the luxurious apartment she shared with James, Isabel Collins was restless. The 25-year-old bride paced back and forth in the master bedroom, catching glimpses of her white silk robe in the mirror. Her wedding gown, a stunning creation by a famous designer, hung nearby, a sight that should have filled her with joy and anticipation. Instead, Isabel felt a knot in her stomach she couldn't untangle. "It's just pre-wedding nerves," she murmured to herself, trying to sound convincing. But the doubts persisted, echoing in her mind like an unwanted mantra. James was older, successful, everything she'd ever dreamed of in a husband. So why did she feel this unease? Vyaki on the eve of her wedding, was she questioning everything? Her eyes fell on her phone. For a moment, she considered calling her best friend to vent. But what would she say? That she was having second thoughts about marrying one of the most eligible men in town. Isabel shook her head, pushing away the negative thoughts. "It's just stress," she said aloud, as though the statement could make it true. Picking up a glass of champagne she'd left on the bedside table, Isabel took a long sip, letting the bubbly liquid calm her nerves. Tomorrow, she would be Mrs. Carter, She would have everything she'd ever wanted: status, security, a powerful husband. The fairy tale she'd always dreamed of was just hours away. Then why did she feel as though she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to fall? With a frustrated sigh, Isabel stepped onto the apartment's balcony. The city glimmered below, its lights promising a world of possibilities. Tomorrow all of it would be hers. "It's the right thing to do," she whispered to the night, as if making a promise to herself. "It's what I want." Returning to the bedroom, Isabel glanced once more at the wedding gown. It was perfect, like everything about this wedding. Maybe too perfect. Shaking her head to dispel the thought, Isabel lay down, forcing her eyes shut. Tomorrow would be the most important day of her life. There was no room for doubts. But even as sleep finally claimed her, a small voice in the back of her mind persisted, questioning whether she was truly ready for what tomorrow would bring. Night pressed on, blanketing the city in darkness. In 3 different places, 4 people wrestled with their own demons, each preparing in their own way for a day that would change their lives forever. The stage was set, the players in position. All that remained was for the curtain to rise and for the drama to unfold. The afternoon sun bathed the centuries-old cathedral in a golden glow, as though the heavens themselves were blessing the union about to take place. Luxury cars pulled up in front of the immense oak doors, spilling a steady stream of elegant guests. The chatter of excited voices mingled with the soft strains of a string quartet playing in the atrium. Photographers positioned themselves strategically, capturing each moment, every smile, every hug. The air was thick with anticipation and a hint of gossip. After all, James Carter's wedding, one of the city's most sought-after bachelors, was the event of the year. Inside the cathedral, the splendor was breathtaking. Exuberant floral arrangements adorned every pew, their fragrances mingling with the gentle aroma of incense. Crystals dangled from the high ceiling, reflecting the light in thousands of glittering points. It was a setting worthy of a fairy tale. At the altar, James Carter shifted discreetly, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. His immaculate tuxedo showed no sign of the whirlwind of emotions churning inside him. His eyes moved anxiously through the crowd of guests, searching for one face in particular. "Relax," Thomas whispered beside him, offering a reassuring smile. "She'll come." James nodded stiffly, his expression a mask of calm, barely hiding his growing anxiety. It wasn't Isabel, his bride, he was so eagerly awaiting, but rather Marie, his ex-wife. The plan to humiliate her publicly was the only thing keeping him focused, preventing him from succumbing to the panic threatening to overwhelm him. The minutes dragged on. The soft music continued, filling the air with romantic melodies that seemed to mock James's palpable tension. Then a murmur rippled through the assembly. Heads turned. Curious gazes converged on the cathedral's entrance. James felt his heart race, anticipation and something else, something he refused to name, making his blood pump faster. Marie Jones entered, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. She was stunning in a navy blue dress that gently hugged her curves, her brown hair pinned up in an elegant bun. But it wasn't her beauty that caused the sudden hush inside the cathedral. Beside her, hand in hers, was a boy who made James's heart stop for an instant. Time seemed to crawl as Marie walked down the central aisle, the sound of her heels echoing in the shocked silence. The boy at her side looked around with wide-eyed wonder, a shy smile flickering on his lips. James felt as though the floor had vanished beneath his feet. That face, those eyes, it was like looking into a mirror of the past. Each step Marie took in his direction felt endless, every second an earth-shattering revelation. The guests began whispering furiously, a buzz of speculation filling the air. "Who's the boy? He looks exactly like... Could it be?" Thomas, beside James, let out a muffled exclamation of surprise. "James," he whispered, his voice tense. "That boy." But James could hardly hear him. His gaze was locked on the child, unable to look away. The boy, no older than 5 or 6, was his spitting image. The same piercing blue eyes, the same determined chin, even a way of walking that felt eerily familiar, sending James's stomach into knots. Marie finally reached the front of the cathedral. Her eyes met James's, a mixture of defiance and something deeper, more complex. For a moment, it was as though the last 5 years had vanished, and they were just James and Marie again, lost in each other's gaze. "Hello, James," Marie said softly, her voice carrying a calm that defied the chaos around them. "There's someone you need to meet." The boy looked up, first at Marie, then at James. His smile, the very smile James knew so well from his own mirror, widened. "Hi," he said shyly. "I'm Lucas." Lucas. The name hit James like a punch to the gut. Suddenly everything made sense. The timing, the striking resemblance, Marie's look. "He's," James began, his voice failing him. "Your son," Marie finished, her voice firm yet gentle. "Our son." The world around James seemed to vanish. The murmur of the guests, the soft music, even Thomas's presence faded into a meaningless blur. All he could see was Lucas's face, a miniature version of himself, staring back with a mix of curiosity and hope. 5 years. 5 years of not knowing. 5 years lost. The anger James had harbored against Marie for so long suddenly felt childish and hollow in the face of this revelation. "Why?" he began, but the words died in his throat. Marie stepped closer, her expression softening. "Not here," she said quietly. "Not now, but I thought you both deserved to finally meet." Lucas, oblivious to the unfolding drama, smiled at James again. "Mommy says you're really important. Is it true you have a helicopter?" The innocent question, so out of place amid the tension, nearly made James burst into hysterical laughter. He crouched down, leveling with the child, his child. "Yes, I do," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Maybe one day I can show it to you." Lucas's face lit up at this promise, and James felt something inside him melt. All the revenge plans, all the bitterness he'd nurtured, none of it mattered now. At that moment, a shrill scream cut through the air, shattering the bubble that seemed to have formed around them. What is going on here? Isabel, the forgotten bride, stood at the cathedral entrance, her white dress billowing around her like a cloud of indignation. Her gaze darted from James to Marie to Lucas, horror and confusion etched on her face. Chaos erupted in the cathedral. Guests stood up, voices rose in a flurry of questions and exclamations. Thomas tried to calm everyone, but his voice was drowned out by the commotion. In the middle of it all, James remained crouched, his eyes fixed on Lucas. The boy, frightened by the sudden clamor, clung to Marie's leg. "I'm sorry," James whispered, not clear whether he was speaking to Lucas, Marie, or both. Marie placed a protective hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Maybe we should go," she said gently. But before they could move, Isabel stormed down the aisle, fury blazing in her eyes. "Will someone explain to me what's going on here?" she demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. "James." James stood up slowly, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze on him. The day that was supposed to be about triumph and revenge had turned into something else entirely. As he looked from Isabel to Marie and the son he'd just discovered, James realized nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The dream wedding had turned into a public nightmare, and James Carter was at the center of a storm he himself had created. The silence that followed Isabel's outburst was deafening. The cathedral, which had been filled moments before with excited whispers and soft music, now felt frozen in time. Every eye was trained on the center of the drama. James nigh, still in shock, Marie, a hand on Lucas's shoulder, and Isabel, whose face showed alternating fury and disbelief. James was the first to move, taking a hesitant step toward Lucas. His eyes couldn't leave the boy's face, every detail confirming the truth Marie had just revealed. "He's My son? James asked, his voice little more than a ragged whisper. Marie nodded, her gaze locked on James's with a mixture of challenge and apprehension. Yes. Lucas is 5. I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after I left. A shocked murmur swept through the guests. Isabel, who had reached the altar, clutched James's arm with force. What is this? She hissed, anger flashing in her eyes. James, who is this child? James opened his mouth to answer, but words failed him. How could he explain what he himself barely understood? How could he justify the existence of a son he had never known? Thomas was the one who broke the standstill, stepping forward with a concerned expression. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a delicate situation here. Perhaps it would be best if— No, Isabel interrupted, her shrill voice echoing through the cathedral. We're not going to pretend this isn't happening. James, I demand an explanation now. James finally tore his gaze away from Lucas, meeting his bride's furious eyes. Isabel, I had no idea. I swear I didn't know. Marie took a step forward, her posture straight and unwavering despite the tension in the air. This isn't James's fault. I never told him about Lucas. This is as much of a shock to him as it is to you, Isabel. Isabel laughed, a bitter and disbelieving sound. Oh, so I should thank you for choosing my wedding day to drop this bombshell. How considerate, Marie. Little Lucas, sensing the hostility in the air, clung tighter to Marie's leg. Mommy, he whispered, his small voice filled with fear. The sound of Lucas's voice seemed to snap James back to reality. He knelt down again, ignoring Isabel's protests. It's okay, Lucas, he said gently, surprising himself with the tenderness in his voice. No one is going to hurt you. Marie watched the interaction with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to shield Lucas from this chaos, to get him far away. Another part acknowledged James's right to meet his son. Why now, Marie? James asked, standing to face his ex-wife. Why wait 5 years to tell me? Marie took a deep breath, years of pent-up emotions threatening to spill over. At first, it was the pain of betrayal. Then, it was fear. Fear you'd take Lucas away from me, use your money and influence to get custody. And then it just became easier to keep things as they were. James felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. The mention of his past betrayal, the reason Marie left him, brought back a tidal wave of guilt he'd tried to bury for years. Isabel, who had been watching the scene with mounting horror, finally exploded. This is ridiculous. We're in the middle of a wedding ceremony. My wedding ceremony. James, are you just going to stand there while this woman ruins everything? Her shrill cries echoed through the cathedral, making Lucas shrink even further behind Marie. The guests, who had been watching in stunned silence, began murmuring more loudly, some even standing up from their seats. James found himself torn, literally, between his past and his future. On one side, Marie and Lucas, a family he never knew he had. On the other, Isabel and the promise of a new life he had been about to begin. James began, his voice faltering. I don't know what to say. Isabel, I swear I didn't know about Lucas. Marie, I don't understand why you picked this moment to tell me. Marie shrugged, a gesture that seemed out of place given the gravity of the situation. Honestly, when I got the invitation, something snapped inside me. I thought about all the times I looked at Lucas and saw you. All his questions about the father he never knew. I realized I couldn't keep this secret anymore. Thomas, seeing the situation about to spiral completely out of control, made another attempt to intervene. Look, it's clear we have a lot to discuss here, but this isn't the place or the time. Maybe we should— No! Isabel cut him off again. I'm not postponing my wedding because of this setup. James, you have to choose. Now it's her or me. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. All eyes turned to James, waiting for his response. James looked at Isabel, radiant in her wedding gown, the future he had planned so carefully. Then his gaze shifted to Marie and Lucas, the past he thought he'd left behind, but which now offered a second chance he never thought he'd have. James began, his voice trembling. I can't make that choice right now. Isabel, I'm sorry, but this is my son. I need time. Isabel's face twisted in fury and pain. With a cry of anger, she tore the veil from her head and flung it at James's feet. You're a coward, James Carter, a coward and a liar. With those words, she spun around and ran back up the cathedral aisle, leaving a trail of shock and confusion behind her. Chaos erupted again. Guests stood. Voices rose in a clamor of questions and exclamations. Thomas tried to calm the crowd, but his voice was swallowed by the confusion. In the midst of it all, James, Marie, and Lucas remained in a strangely calm pocket. James knelt once more, his eyes finding Lucas's. I'm so sorry about all this, he said softly. You didn't deserve to be thrown into this mess. Lucas, displaying a wisdom beyond his years, just smiled shyly. It's okay. Mommy says sometimes things get messy before they get better. Marie placed a hand on James's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that surprised them both. We should go. We've caused enough upheaval for one day. James nodded, rising to his feet slowly. Yes, you should, but can we talk later? There's so much I need to know, so much I need to understand. Marie agreed with a nod. Of course, you have the right to know your son, James. And Lucas deserves to know his father. As Marie and Lucas left, James watched them go, a swirl of emotions raging inside him. The wedding was ruined. His bride had stormed off in anger, and his life had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes. But as he saw Lucas glance back at him one last time, a small smile on his lips, James felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. The future he'd planned so meticulously lay in ruins, but in its place, a new possibility had arisen. A possibility that, despite all the chaos and confusion, made James smile for the first time that day. The silence that followed Marie's revelation was so profound that one might have heard a fly's wings flutter. For a moment, it felt as if time had frozen inside the cathedral. Every eye was fixed on the small group at the altar. James, pale with shock. Marie, her expression a mixture of resolve and trepidation, and little Lucas, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding around him. James was the first to speak, his voice barely above a hoarse whisper. My son, Marie, how is this possible? Marie drew a deep breath, her gaze never leaving James. Remember that last night, before I left. Well, apparently, we left more than just bitter memories. A shocked murmur rippled through the congregation. Guests exchanged incredulous looks, some whispering fiercely among themselves. The news spread like wildfire, each repetition adding a new layer of speculation and scandal. Isabel, who had appeared paralyzed at the altar, suddenly came to life. Her face, once radiant with the joy of a bride, was now contorted in rage and humiliation. Is this some kind of sick joke? She screamed, her shrill voice echoing off the cathedral walls. James, tell me this isn't true. James, still dazed, only shook his head, unable to form words. His eyes were glued to Lucas, studying every detail of the boy's face, seeing his own reflection in those innocent features. Interpreting James's silence as confirmation, Isabel let out a shriek of fury that made everyone flinch. In one swift motion, she ripped the veil from her head and threw it at James's feet. You liar, you cheat, she shouted, angry tears rolling down her cheeks, smudging her carefully applied makeup. All this time you had a child and never told me. Isabel, I swear I didn't know, James finally managed, his voice trembling. But Isabel wasn't listening. With one final look of contempt, she turned and ran down the cathedral aisle, her wedding dress trailing behind like a white flag of surrender. The chaos that ensued was immediate and ear-splitting. Guests rushed from their seats, some chasing after Isabel, others approaching the altar demanding explanations. The music, which had stopped abruptly when Marie arrived, was replaced by a cacophony of outraged voices and shouts of disbelief. "This is outrageous. Poor Isabel. How could they do this?" Thomas, the best man, desperately tried to restore calm, but his voice was lost in the tumult. A few overly agitated guests started shoving one another, threatening to turn the scandal into an all-out brawl. In the middle of this pandemonium, Lucas began to cry, frightened by the noise and confusion. Marie hugged him protectively, casting James a look of apology. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice nearly drowned out by the chaos. "I didn't want it to happen like this." James, emerging from his stupor, took a step toward them. "Marie, why now? Why here?" Before she could answer, a group of enraged guests who had managed to reach the altar cut them off. "How could you do this, James? Ruining your own wedding like this? And you, miss, what kind of person brings a child to wreck a ceremony?" Accusations flew from all sides, and James found himself in the unusual position of defending Marie and Lucas from the guests' wrath. He stood between them and the angry crowd, arms outstretched in a protective gesture. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice finally rising above the din. "This is between me, Marie, and Lucas. No one has the right to judge or attack them." His words seemed to have a momentary calming effect on the crowd. The shouting subsided to resentful mutterings, and people took a step back, still casting accusatory glances. In that moment of relative peace, James turned to Marie and Lucas. The boy was still crying softly, clinging to his mother, and James felt his heart clench with an emotion he couldn't name. "You need to leave," he said gently. "It's not safe here." I'll be in touch later when things calm down." Marie nodded, grateful. "I really am sorry, James. I thought... Well, it doesn't matter what I thought. This was a mistake." As Marie prepared to leave with Lucas, James crouched down, meeting his son's eyes. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "I'm sorry about all this. I promise we'll get to know each other soon. Okay?" Lucas, tears still glistening in his eyes, managed a small smile and nodded. With Thomas escorting them out through a side exit, James found himself alone at the altar, facing a throng of shocked and angry guests. The priest, who had until then watched in stunned silence, finally spoke. I think the ceremony is cancelled." Those words seemed to break the last thread of propriety. Guests began dispersing in clusters, some still yelling accusations, others merely shaking their heads in disapproval. James remained rooted to the spot, staring at the empty space where, minutes earlier, he should have exchanged vows with Isabel. Now, all that remained were trampled flowers, an abandoned veil, and the crushing realization that his life would never be the same. As the cathedral slowly emptied, James was left to contend not only with the chaos surrounding him, but also with the whirlwind of emotions inside him. Anger, confusion, shock, and surprisingly, a sliver of hope. He had a son he never knew existed. The wedding of his dreams had turned into a public nightmare. But amid the ruins of his carefully laid plans, a new possibility had emerged. A possibility that, despite everything, made James smile for the first time that chaotic day. The chaos in the cathedral gradually faded, leaving behind a heavy silence and a surreal sense of unreality. James found himself alone at the altar, the last guests trickling out in murmurs and sidelong glances. He loosened his tie, feeling suffocated not just by the fabric, but by the day's revelations. His eyes wandered to the spot where Marie and Lucas had stood. Lucas, his son. The words echoed in his mind, bringing with them a flood of memories he'd fought to bury for 5 long years. Flashback. 7 years ago, Marie's laughter rang through the apartment, blending with the soft jazz playing on the sound system. James watched her from the kitchen, a goofy grin on his face as she danced without a care, a wine glass in her hand. "Come here, you workaholic," she called, extending her free hand toward him. "Forget dinner for a second and dance with me." James couldn't resist. Dropping the wooden spoon, he joined her in the living room, wrapping her in his arms. They moved in sync, as if they were made for each other. "Did you know I love you?" James murmured against her hair. Marie lifted her face, her eyes shining with happiness. I think you've mentioned it once or twice, but I don't mind hearing it again." They kissed, slow and deep, the world around them disappearing. In that moment, it was just James and Marie lost in each other, building dreams of a future together. The James of the present shut his eyes, the memory's sweetness almost painful. How had they come to this point? How had he let that love slip through his fingers? The answer, he knew, lay in his own actions. The memory that followed wasn't so sweet. Flashback. 5 years ago, the crash of shattering glass echoed through the apartment. James winced, knowing what would come next. "How could you?" Marie's voice was thick with pain and disbelief. "With my best friend, James. My best friend." He tried to move toward her, but Marie recoiled, her eyes flashing with anger. "Don't touch me! Don't you dare touch me!" "Marie, please," he begged. "It was a mistake. It meant nothing. I love you. You know that." But Marie was already picking up her bag, heading for the door. "Love? You call this love?" "Cheating on me with Sophie. Lying to me for months." James felt panic rise in his chest. "Where are you going?" "Marie, let's talk about this. We can fix this. I promise." Marie stopped at the door, turning to face him one last time. Her eyes, once brimming with love, were now empty. "There's nothing to fix, James. It's over." The door closed with a soft click, leaving James alone with the weight of his actions. Back in the present, James felt a solitary tear slide down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, but Thomas, who was approaching cautiously, noticed. "James," Thomas asked softly, "maybe we should get out of here." James nodded mechanically, letting his friend guide him out of the cathedral. The cool air outside hit him, pulling him partially back to reality. "She was pregnant," he murmured, more to himself than to Thomas. "All this time I had a son and didn't know." Thomas placed a comforting hand on James's shoulder. "You couldn't have known, James. Marie never told you." The mention of Marie's name brought another recent memory crashing into James's mind. Flashback. 30 minutes earlier. "Why Marie?" James asked, his voice trembling. "Why hide the pregnancy? Why deny me the right to know my own child?" Marie glanced at Lucas, who watched with wide eyes, then back at James. "At first it was anger," she admitted. "I was hurt, betrayed. I found out I was pregnant weeks after leaving. And the idea of coming back, of giving you that joy after what you did, I just couldn't." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Then it was fear. Fear you'd take Lucas away, use your money and influence to get custody. And then it just became easier to go on the way things were." James felt a torrent of conflicting emotions, anger at the concealment, understanding for the pain he'd caused, and deep sorrow for the years he'd lost. "I would have been a good father, Marie," he said softly. "Despite my mistakes, I would have loved our child." Marie nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know, and that's why I'm here now. Lucas deserves to meet you, James. And you deserve to know him." "James?" Thomas's voice brought him back to the present. "What do you want to do now?" James looked at his friend, feeling utterly lost. I don't know, Thomas. Everything has changed. I have a son, a 5-year-old boy who doesn't know me, who doesn't know who I am." He sank onto a nearby bench, burying his head in his hands. "How do I deal with this? How do I become a father to a child I've just met?" Thomas sat beside him, offering silent support that was more comforting than any words could be. After a few minutes, James lifted his head, his eyes reflecting a mix of determination and fear. "I need to see them again, Thomas. I need to know my son. I need to understand everything." Thomas nodded. "I'll help in any way I can, my friend. But first, I think we need to deal with..." He gestured vaguely toward the cathedral, where the last remnants of the failed wedding were being cleaned up. James closed his eyes, suddenly remembering Isabel. Another person he'd hurt, another relationship he'd destroyed. "God, what a mess I've made," he murmured. Yet even amid the guilt and confusion, a small spark of hope ignited in James's chest. He had a son, a little boy who was part of him and part of Marie, a living bond to the love they once shared. "I'll fix this," James said, more to himself than to Thomas. "Somehow, I'll fix all of this." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the cathedral steps, James stood up. The day that should have been the start of a new life had indeed become one, just not the one he'd ever imagined. But maybe, he thought, it could still be a fresh start. A start that mattered more than any he'd planned. With one last glance at the cathedral, James turned to Thomas. "Let's go. We have a lot of work to do." And so, with tentative yet determined steps, James left behind the wreckage of his failed wedding and walked toward an uncertain future, but one filled with possibility, a future that, for the first time in years, included the promise of genuine love and redemption. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the garden of the mansion where the wedding reception was meant to be held. What should have been a scene of celebration and joy now resembled an emotional battlefield. Isabel, still in her now crumpled wedding dress, found James sitting alone on an ornate bench. Her eyes, once full of love, now burned with a toxic mix of anger and pain. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "All these years, all these promises, all lies." James looked up, the weight of his actions clearly etched on his weary face. "Isabel, I swear I didn't know about Lucas. I never—" "It's not just about the boy, James." Isabel cut him off, her voice rising. "It's about everything. You told me Marie was just a meaningless ex. You promised there were no secrets between us. And now, this." Guests who hadn't yet left began gathering, drawn by the commotion. Among them was Thomas, watching intently, his calculating eyes taking in the scene. James stood, trying to placate Isabel. "I know I made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" Isabel laughed bitterly. "Calling this a mistake is like calling a hurricane a slight breeze. You ruined everything, James. Our wedding, our trust, our future." At that moment, Marie emerged from the crowd, Lucas's hand firmly in hers. Her presence added fuel to an already roaring fire. "Perhaps I can clarify a few things," Marie said, her voice surprisingly calm in the midst of chaos. All eyes turned to her, including Thomas's, who stepped forward, clearly interested in what she had to say. Marie took a deep breath before continuing. "James invited me to this wedding intending to humiliate me publicly," she revealed, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "He wanted me to witness his happiness, his rise, while he planned to expose me as the bitter, lonely ex." Gasps of shock and indignant murmurs spread through the crowd. Isabel turned to James, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Is that true?" she demanded, though James's guilty expression was answer enough. James opened his mouth to defend himself, but words failed him. A plan that once seemed so clever now appeared petty and cruel under the harsh light of truth. Thomas, seeing the situation deteriorating quickly, tried to step in. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm but gentle, "I believe we're all a bit overwhelmed by the day's events. Perhaps it would be better if—" But Isabel was not about to let the matter drop. "No, Thomas. Enough of covering up James's lies. Enough of pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't." She turned to the crowd of guests, her voice filled with raw emotion. "You all came here today expecting to witness a union of love, but what we have is a web of lies and betrayals." Chaos erupted once more. Guests shouted accusations, some defending James, others condemning him. Marie stood silently, shielding Lucas from the escalating disorder. James, feeling cornered, finally found his voice. "Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I planned something terrible. But I'm facing the consequences now, aren't I? I've lost my wedding, my reputation, and I've just found out I have a son I never knew existed. Isn't that punishment enough? Rather than calming the crowd, his words only seemed to inflame tempers further. The garden, once a scene of elegance and romance, now more closely resembled an emotional gladiator arena. Thomas E., realizing how far out of hand things had gotten, discreetly signaled the security team. It was time to end the spectacle before matters got even worse. As guards began gently but firmly guiding guests away, Thomas approached James. "This is out of control," he muttered. "We need to get you out of here." James nodded mechanically, his eyes darting between Isabel, quietly sobbing in a corner, and Marie, who clutched Lucas's hand protectively, fending off curious and accusatory stares. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his wedding day and facing an uncertain future, James felt lonelier than ever. The consequences of his actions, both past and present, had finally caught up with him, and he had no idea where to begin repairing the damage. As Thomas guided him away from the chaos, James cast one last look at Lucas. The boy, frightened by all the commotion, was clinging tightly to Marie's hand. In that brief moment of connection, James felt a pang of something he couldn't name: regret, hope, or perhaps a blend of both. The storm he had inadvertently unleashed was far from over. In fact, James had the distinct feeling that this was only the beginning. What the future held, he couldn't say. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The turmoil in the mansion's garden began to die down, leaving in its wake an almost tangible aura of emotional devastation. James, led by Thomas, retreated to his private study, hoping to find a moment of peace amid the day's chaos. He had barely settled into his leather chair when his phone vibrated urgently. With a weary sigh, James answered without checking the caller ID. "Hello? Mr. Carter." The voice on the other end was tense, almost frantic. "This is Bernard, from the finance department. Sir, we have a critical situation." James straightened in his chair, a sense of dread settling in his stomach. "What's happened, Bernard?" "The company's stock, it's crashed, sir. We're talking a 60% drop in a matter of hours. Investors are panicking and withdrawing funds en masse." The world around James seemed to vanish. He scarcely registered Thomas approaching him, concern etched on his face. How is that possible?" James stammered, his mind struggling to process the news. Bernard hesitated before continuing. "Sir, it appears there was a leak. Information about high-risk, possibly fraudulent investments in your name has gone public. The market is reacting." James felt as though he'd taken a punch to the gut. Fraudulent investments. He had never authorized such a thing. Unless... His gaze slowly shifted to Thomas, who now wore an oddly calm expression. "Bernard, I'll call you back in a few minutes. Don't do anything until then," James instructed, ending the call. A heavy silence descended on the study. James stared at Thomas, years of friendship and trust crumbling before his eyes. "What did you do, Thomas?" James's voice was low, dangerous. To his surprise, Thomas did not try to deny anything. He simply sat in the chair opposite James, a sad smile playing at his lips. "I'm sorry, James. I really am. But times are changing, and I had to secure my future." Realization struck James like lightning. You diverted my money, made fraudulent investments in my name." Thomas nodded slowly. "It wasn't personal, James. Just business. I saw an opportunity and took it. Unfortunately for you, that opportunity meant your financial ruin." James leaped up, his chair toppling over with a crash. "How could you? I trusted you. You were my best friend, the best man at my wedding." A bitter laugh escaped Thomas's lips. "The best man at a wedding that never happened. Maybe it's a sign, James. Maybe the universe is telling you it's time to start fresh." Before James could respond, the study door burst open. Isabel entered, her eyes red from crying but now glinting with fierce determination. "Is it true?" she demanded, waving her phone around. "It's all over the news. James's company. Is it going bankrupt?" Thomas stood calmly. "Maybe I should leave you two alone," he said, heading for the door. "Don't you dare leave, go you traitor!" James roared, but Thomas had already vanished, leaving James and Isabel alone with their devastating reality. Isabel looked at James, the anger in her eyes morphing into something more complex, a mix of pity and disappointment. "So it's true," she said softly. "You've lost everything." James sank back into his chair, the enormity of his situation finally hitting him in full. "Isabel, I swear I didn't know. Thomas, he betrayed me. He made fraudulent investments in my name." Isabel laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "More lies, James. Or are you really so naive? So blind you couldn't see your best friend stabbing you in the back?" James opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came. In a single day, he'd lost his wedding, discovered he had a son, and now faced total financial collapse. Isabel studied him for a long moment, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. Finally, she removed her engagement ring and placed it gently on James's desk. "It's over, James," she said, finality in her tone. "Not just our wedding, but everything. I can't be part of this. I can't stand by a man who built his life on lies and has now lost it all." James felt hot tears rolling down his cheeks, unable to stop them. "Isabel, please. I love you. We can get through this together." But Isabel was already walking to the door. She paused briefly, looking back at James one last time. "No, James, you have to get through this alone. Find yourself, fix your mistakes, become the man you pretended to be all this time. Maybe then you can find real happiness." With those words, she left, leaving James alone with the wreckage of his life. For several minutes, James remained motionless, staring at nothing. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded deafening in the oppressive silence of the study. Each second was a brutal reminder of how completely his world had collapsed in a matter of hours. Finally, with trembling hands, he lifted his phone. Dozens of missed calls, frantic text messages from partners and lawyers. The empire he had built over years was crumbling before his eyes. As he scrolled through the notifications, his gaze fell on a message from an unsaved number. It was from Marie. "James, I heard the news. I know things are tough right now, but when you're ready, Lucas and I will be here. He deserves to meet his father, no matter the circumstances." A single tear fell onto the phone's screen. Amid the chaos and destruction, that simple message offered a glimmer of something. Not exactly hope, but perhaps a chance at redemption. James stood slowly, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He walked to the window, watching the last of the guests leaving the property, employees dismantling what should have been his wedding celebration. Everything was lost. His fortune, his fiancée, his reputation. But as he watched the sun set on the horizon, James made a silent promise to himself. He would fix this. Somehow, he would find a way to rise again, to be the man his son deserved. The day that should have marked the start of a new life had, in fact, done just that, only in a way James could never have imagined. As night fell, he braced himself for an uncertain future, but one he would face with the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything left to regain. Twilight cast long shadows over Carter Mansion, once a symbol of power and success, now a silent witness to a spectacular downfall. James wandered the empty corridors, his footsteps echoing with an almost ghostly resonance. Every corner of the house seemed to scream truths he desperately tried to deny. In the dining room, the table was still set for a wedding feast that would never take place. Crystal glasses reflected the dim light, creating a melancholy sparkle. James grabbed a bottle of expensive champagne, meant for the nuptial toast, and popped it open without ceremony. The cork's report sounded like destiny's mocking laughter. As he drank straight from the bottle, James caught his reflection in one of the room's large mirrors. The man staring back was a stranger. Disheveled hair, red, puffy eyes, a loosened tie and rumpled shirt. Where was the powerful magnate he fancied himself to be? Pathetic, he muttered at his reflection, raising the bottle in a self-deprecating toast. The sound of footsteps alerted him to another presence. Turning, he found Marie watching him with a mix of pity and concern. Lucas stood at her side, half hidden behind her legs, eyeing James with wide, curious eyes. "James," Marie began softly, "maybe it's not a good idea." He gave a bitter laugh, cutting her off. "A good idea? Nothing I've done in the last few years has been a good idea, Marie. Why stop now?" Marie sighed, stepping closer. "I know everything seems terrible right now, but—" "Terrible," James burst out, his voice echoing in the empty hall. "Terrible doesn't even begin to cover it. I've lost everything, Marie. My company, my fortune, my fiancé. Everything I built. It's all gone." Lucas shrank back at the raised tone, and Marie instinctively pulled him closer. The sight of his newly discovered son recoiling in fear was like a punch to James's gut. He staggered, collapsing heavily into a nearby chair. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, anger giving way to a deep sadness. "I didn't mean to scare you. It's just, I don't know what to do anymore." Marie hesitated before drawing up a chair across from him, sitting so they were face to face. Lucas, still cautious, kept some distance. "James," Marie said gently, "I know it's hard to see this now, but maybe this is an opportunity." He looked up and confused. "An opportunity for what? To lose what little I have left?" Marie shook her head. "An opportunity to start over. To be the man you always wanted to be, without the pressure and expectations that come with all of this." She gestured around, indicating the mansion's opulence. James laughed without mirth. "And which man would that be, Marie? Because honestly, I have no idea who I am without all of this." At that moment, Lucas, summoning courage, stepped forward. "You're my dad," he said simply, his small voice firm. Those 3 words hit James like a bolt of lightning. He looked at the boy, his son, and felt something break inside him. The tears he'd been holding back all day finally spilled over. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry for everything, for not being there, for being this." Moved by compassion that surprised even herself, Marie reached out and placed a gentle hand on James's arm. "It's all right, James. You have a chance to make things right now." For several minutes, the only sound in the room was James's muffled sobs. Lucas, unsure what to do, looked to his mother for guidance. Marie nodded encouragingly, and the boy slowly approached James. "Don't cry, Daddy," Lucas said softly, resting a small hand on James's knee. "Mommy always says things get messy before they get better." James raised his head, looking at his son through tear-blurred eyes. The innocence and kindness in Lucas's face were like a balm for his wounded spirit. Without thinking, he pulled the boy into a hug, holding on as if his life depended on it. Marie watched, tears in her own eyes. It was a moment of vulnerability she never thought she'd see in James, the man she once loved and then learned to hate. When James finally calmed, he gently released Lucas and looked at Marie. "What do I do now?" he asked, his voice raw. Marie drew a steadying breath. "You face it, James, one day at a time. You rebuild, not just your life but yourself." James nodded slowly, the reality of his situation finally settling. "I don't know if I can do it alone," he admitted, his vulnerability surprising them both. "You're not alone," Marie responded, surprising herself with her own words. "Lucas and we'll be here. It won't be easy, and there's a lot we need to work out between us, but you're his father, that means something." James glanced at Lucas, who gave him a shy smile, then back at Marie. For the first time all day, he felt a faint glimmer of hope. "Thank you," he whispered. As night fell over Carter Mansion, James found himself staring into an uncertain future, stripped of everything that once defined him. Yet there, with his newly discovered son and the woman he had hurt so deeply, he began to envision the possibility of a new life, a life built not on wealth and power, but on genuine connections and second chances. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges he could hardly imagine, but for the first time in years, James was ready to face the future head-on, not as the arrogant tycoon he'd pretended to be, but as a man determined to redeem himself and be worthy of his son's love. Night had fallen around Carter Mansion, its shadows seeming to echo the somber moods of those inside. James, Amores, Marie, and Lucas were gathered in the living room, the silence between them laden with unspoken emotions and long-buried truths. James looked at his son, then at Marie, and finally at his own trembling hands. The weight of his mistakes, years of lies and manipulations, pressed heavily on his chest. He knew this was the moment of truth, however painful it might be. I need to tell you both everything, he began, his voice rough. You deserve the truth, however ugly it is. Marie nodded silently, while Lucas watched them both with curious, apprehensive eyes. James took a deep breath and began his confession. He spoke of his infidelity years earlier, the incident that drove Marie away. He explained how, consumed by guilt and anger, he buried himself in work, building an empire at the expense of his humanity. He admitted he had planned to humiliate Marie at the wedding, a petty act of revenge that now filled him with shame. I became someone I don't even recognize, James said, silent tears streaking his face. Someone obsessed with power and status, someone who hurts the very people he should love. Marie listened, her face a complex blend of emotions. Part of her wanted to scream, to blame James for all the pain he had caused her over the years. Another part, surprisingly, felt a twinge of compassion for the broken man before her. Why, James? She finally asked, her voice trembling. Why did you let things go this far? James shook his head, defeated. I don't know, Marie. I guess I was trying to prove something. To you, to myself, to the world. But in the end, I only proved I'm a fool. Lucas, who had stayed quiet until then, asked the question that struck James hardest. Don't you love us, Daddy? That innocent query hit James like a punch. He knelt in front of Lucas, looking into his son's eyes, eyes that mirrored his own. Lucas, I love you more than words can say, he managed, voice quavering. I know I don't deserve your love, that I wasn't there, but meeting you has been the best thing that's ever happened to me. Marie watched the exchange, her heart clenching. She had often wondered how the moment of Lucas meeting his father would unfold, but never in her wildest dreams had she envisioned this scenario. What about Mommy? Lucas continued, turning to Marie. Do you still love Daddy? The question took Marie off guard. She looked at James, not seeing the arrogant magnate she had left behind, but a vulnerable, remorseful man. It's complicated, sweetheart, she answered gently. Your dad and I have a long, difficult history. But what matters is that we both love you very much. James nodded, grateful for Marie's diplomatic answer. Your mum is right, Lucas. The love we have for you is the most real, most important thing in our lives. As he spoke, James felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about money, status, or power. All that mattered now was the little boy in front of him and the woman who, despite everything, was still here. I know I don't deserve a second chance, James said, looking from Lucas to Marie. But if you'll let me, I want to try to be better. To be the father Lucas deserves, to be someone you can both be proud of. Marie studied him for a long moment. She saw sincerity in his gaze and vulnerability in his stance. This wasn't the James she had known and left. This was a broken man, yes, but also a man on the brink of real change. It won't be easy, James, she said at last. There's a lot to rebuild, a lot to forgive. James nodded, accepting the challenge implicit in her words. I know, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes. Not for money or status, but for you two, for our family. The word family hung in the air between them, laden with meaning and possibility. Sensing the importance of the moment, Lucas flung his arms around James. I want you to be my real dad, he said, his voice muffled against James's chest. James hugged him back, fresh tears forming in his eyes. He looked at Marie over Lucas's head, a silent question in his gaze. Marie hesitated before joining the embrace, wrapping both James and Lucas in her arms. It was a gesture of forgiveness, of hope, of a new beginning. When they finally pulled apart, James felt different. The crushing weight of guilt and despair had been replaced by something new. Determination. Determination to do better, to right his wrongs, to cherish what truly mattered in life. I promise you both, he said solemnly, from now on, every decision I make, every step I take, will be for the good of this family. Not for money, not for status, just for us. Marie gave him a soft smile, the first genuine one she had directed at him in years. It's a good start, James. One day at a time, remember? James nodded, feeling hopeful for the first time in a very long while. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. There were legal and financial consequences to face, relationships to mend, and a lifetime of habits to break. But looking at Lucas, smiling shyly at him, and Marie, whose eyes reflected both caution and hope, James knew it was worth it. The true value of life wasn't in his bank balance or the size of his mansion. It was right there in that living room, in the form of a little boy who called him Dad and a strong woman who was willing to give him a second chance. As the night wore on, the three stayed together, talking, laughing, and sometimes crying. It was the start of a journey of redemption, forgiveness, and above all, love. A journey James was determined not to waste. 6 months had passed since that fateful night that forever changed the lives of James, Daz, Marie, and Lucas. Autumn had given way to winter, and now spring was in bloom, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings. James adjusted his tie, observing his reflection in the mirror of the small apartment he now called home. It was nothing like the luxurious mansion he once owned, but there was something comforting in its simplicity. He smiled, recalling how Lucas helped decorate the room he used on weekends. Leaving the apartment, James headed to the little cafe on the corner. The aroma of fresh coffee and newly baked pastries greeted him as he opened the door. This was his new venture, modest, honest, and built by his own hands. "Morning, boss," chirped Emma, the young barista he had hired. Her enthusiasm was contagious. "Morning, Emma," James replied with a genuine smile. "How are we looking today?" As Emma updated him on the day's preparations, James couldn't help reflecting on how much his life had changed. The first months after the scandal had been brutal. Investigations, lawsuits, the loss of almost everything he once had. But, surprisingly, James felt lighter, more at peace than ever before. The doorbell jingled, announcing the arrival of Marie and Lucas. James's heart soared at the sight of his son racing toward him. "Dad!" Lucas shouted, throwing himself into James's arms. "Casey, buddy." James hugged him tight, marveling at how natural the gesture had become in the past few months. "Ready for your big day tomorrow?" Lucas nodded enthusiastically. "I can't wait. You're really going to make the cake, right?" James laughed. "Of course I am. A promise is a promise." Marie approached, smiling warmly. "Good morning, James. The place looks great." The relationship between James and Marie had evolved into something neither could have predicted. It wasn't romance. Their old bridges had long since burned, but a genuine friendship and mutual respect, united by their love for Lucas. "Thanks, Marie," James said. "How are things at the hospital?" As they chatted, James noticed the sparkle in Marie's eyes. He knew part of it was due to the new man in her life, a kind, understanding doctor who'd embraced Marie's complicated family situation. "James," Marie said once Lucas was momentarily distracted by a cookie offered by Emma, "there's something I wanted to discuss about tomorrow." James felt a slight pang of apprehension. "Is there a problem?" Marie shook her head, smiling. "No, actually. Well, I was thinking, what if we held Lucas's birthday party at your place? I know it's small, but—" James felt his heart swell with gratitude. "Marie, that would mean a lot to me. Are you sure?" She nodded. "Absolutely. Lucas loves your place and, well, you've worked hard to be a good dad. You deserve it." The day of Lucas's birthday dawned bright and sunny. James's small apartment was adorned with balloons and colorful streamers. In the kitchen, he put the finishing touches on the cake, not a masterpiece, but baked with love. Guests started arriving. School friends of Lucas, Marie and her new boyfriend, even staff from the cafe who had become like a second family to James. When Lucas blew out the candles, making a secret wish, James felt tears of joy forming in his eyes. He glanced around the room, his son beaming, Marie laughing at something her boyfriend said, the happy faces of the guests, and felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude. Later, as the party began to wind down, James found a moment to chat with Marie on the small balcony. "Thank you for this," he said softly. "For giving me this second chance with Lucas, for everything." Marie smiled gently. "You earned it, James. You've changed. The man you are now, he's someone Lucas can be proud to call Dad." James nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "You know, losing everything, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It made me realize what really matters in life." "And what's that?" Marie asked, though she already knew the answer. "Family," James replied without hesitation. "Honesty, integrity, all the things I thought I could buy with money but that are actually priceless." They fell silent for a moment, watching Lucas play with his friends in the small yard below. "There's still a long road ahead," Marie commented. James agreed. "Yes, there is, but for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to every step of it." When the last guest left, James found himself alone with a drowsy Lucas, who was worn out from all the excitement. "Did you like your party, champ?" James asked, helping his son get ready for bed. Lucas nodded sleepily. "It was the best party ever, Dad. Thank you." As he tucked Lucas in, James felt his heart overflowing with love. "Lucas," he said gently, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always love you and be here for you. Do you understand that?" Lucas gave him a drowsy smile. "I know, Dad. I love you too." James kissed his son's forehead and quietly left the room. Back in the living area, he began cleaning up the remnants of the party, reflecting on the past 6 months. He had lost a fortune. Yes, his name, once synonymous with success, now carried the weight of past scandals. But looking at the day's photos scattered on the table, Lucas's bright smile, Marie's laughter, friends gathered, James knew he had gained something far more valuable. He had gained a second chance, a chance to be a good father, a good friend, a man of integrity, a chance to build a life based not on material wealth, but on genuine connections and true values. Storing the last slice of cake in the fridge, James smiled to himself. The road ahead would still be challenging, full of obstacles and uncertainties, but for the first time in his life, he felt genuinely rich, rich in love, purpose, and possibility. And that, James realized, was worth more than all the money in the world.